6:31, so I'll go ahead and begin. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us to the second to last of our Spring 21 MCAD MFA Professional Practice Series. Before we begin, I'd like to take some time to do a land acknowledgement. The community of Minneapolis is comprised of many nations, the largest being the Dakota, whose cultural history begins at the confluence of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers, a sacred place they call Bedote, and the Anishinaabe, whose homelands extend northward from the city. Please take time to learn about which lands you are occupying and stewarding at native-land.ca. You can also learn more about land acknowledgement and resources from the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture at usdac.us/nativeland. And to find ways to directly support the local community here in Minneapolis, please visit the Bedote Learning Center to find out more at bedote.org. A couple of house rules before we begin. Your audio and video will be muted for this webinar, but captionings are available. If you experience any technical difficulties, please email us at av_support@mcad.edu. And please feel free to leave questions in the Q&A section. And we will select from the submissions after her speaker has presented, although Allison has mentioned that she is open to answering questions during the presentation.
Yes.
Just type them into the box. A recording of this webinar will be made available to MCAD students after the event. You can find the full professional practice series at mcad-mfa.com/spring 2021 professional practice series. Many thanks to our support faculty and staff at MCAD, including Kylie Van Noot, Seth Dalseed, and Nikki Motakalam. This event is sponsored by the MCAD MFA program, which is a community of makers, thinkers, researchers, and creative professionals working in a mentor-based interdisciplinary environment. For more info, please visit mcad-mfa.com. And our last ProPac is going to be next Thursday, April 29th at 6:30. Please join us for an event with Caitlin Warner of Fox Tax Accounting, who will be talking about creative workers and taxes in a timely way to end off the semester. But for tonight, please join me in welcoming MCAD MFA alumni, Allison Bolah. Allison Bolah is a South Florida-based artist and educator who participates in collaborative cultural endeavors that join academic and community work in her studio practice. As an artist, Allison's interdisciplinary practice draws on her experiences in literature and photography, in installation, sculpture, sound, and paper-based objects. She documents the ways that gesture and language are shaped into specific narratives. As an artist and letters educator, Allison helps her students develop the habits of mind and technical skills that can deepen their understanding of the world, finesse their relationship with the many communities, and shape their self-perception for the better. She is currently the Language Arts Department Chair at a South Florida high school. Allison holds a Master in Fine Arts and Visual Studies from Minneapolis College of Art and Design, a Master of Education in Curriculum and Instruction and a Graduate Certificate in Gender Studies from Florida Atlantic University, and a Bachelor of the Arts in English from Howard University. Allison, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. I have to really thank Ellen for connecting us and just being interested enough in how I do my work as an artist to have me come in. I had a fantastic time as a graduate student at MCAD. It was the best environment for me to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish, which was to make a foundation for having an art practice that fit into having a life. There were some ideas that I had before I got to MCAD about how an artist could position themselves in the community. And I used that time while I was there to come up with some foundational theory and look at the work of different artists whose practices, the work that they made, but also the way that they position themselves in their communities would influence how I did my own work. So I really am excited to be here and share back what the result of that is. It's almost 10 years. Can you believe it? Oh my gosh, time flies. I graduated from MCAD in 2014. So 7 years, 7 years, 3 years, give or take a student loan or two. So today I'm going to be talking to you about one project, but it's going to give me the opportunity to kind of give you some insight into how I do, how I maintain my practice. So I'm going to share my screen. I'll have the camera on as well. If you see me looking up and away, it's because I have other screens with other information as well to share with you. So, okay. And we ran through this, so I'm hoping that everything is working as it ought to. You see that? Yes? Good? No notes?
It looks good.
Fantastic. Okay, so the project I want to talk to you about today is EULA League, and it is a conceptual art working group focused on the aesthetics and performance of language to consider and act on texts that shape or describe life in South Florida is where I'm located, but in the United States in general. And the word EULA is End User License Agreement. If you have an iPhone or Facebook, you have agreed to the end user license agreements that are associated with those pieces of software, those programs, those applications. And I extended the idea of the end user license agreement beyond that literal document to help me think about the social contract. How do we engage with one another? And it occurred to me that we treat the social contract very much like we treat our end user license agreements. We have a hazy idea that the thing exists and that there are principles guiding how we interact with one another, but we don't really have a clear, conscious idea about the arrangements behind what we consider to be our social contract. The project EULA League was designed to support community members as they develop that conscious thought around how they might ground their own and my own community engagement. And the way that it is structured, it can be virtual, it can be in person. Ideally, people can pop in. If it's in a public space or it's supported by an institution, people can walk by and come and join in. I'm a teacher and a teacher to the core. So there's pre-reading that a person can do before they participate in the working group, but it's not necessary. I structured it so that you can come in, just like if we had the first EULA League in a Whole Foods, there's a community space in Whole Foods. And you can walk by and decide you want to participate. You can kind of eavesdrop and still get something out of it. So the structure is this pre-reading and always a civic document like the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. We use the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. We did EULA League here in South Florida with Nova Southeastern University, or pardon me, was it? It was the Fort Lauderdale Library. And we looked at the budget for the state of Florida for the year 2020. And then I pair it with poems or essays or novels. And we look at the aesthetics of the civic document through the lens of the literature. It's a didactic process, but that's not a bad word for me. Because for me, school doesn't always have to be a place where you are in a punitive environment or a competitive environment, or you're engaged in something that's immediately utilitarian. It's a place to share and shape ideas. And I think MCAD, as far as learning environments go for me, was really that. That was my experience of MCAD. So I'm going to play, when I do the EULA League meetings, we always open with the art piece that is made out of the civic text, because I say, okay, so this is the meeting that we're going to have. I'm a facilitator and I select the texts. I facilitate ways of looking at them, but not what the person is going to think about it. So I take the text in the pre-reading period and I make something. And you'll see several of the pieces that I've made from different documents. And I'm going to play for you We, You, which is one of the first pieces that I made when I created EULA League.
We call, you agree, you will find, you understand. We designed, we collect, we encourage, you make. You own, you post, you specifically give, you grant, you post, you delete. You delete, you understand. You use, we require. You publish. We always appreciate, you understand. We do, we cannot guarantee, we need. You will not post. You will not collect. You will not engage. You will not upload. You will not solicit. You will not bully. You will not post. You will not develop or operate. You will not use. You will not do anything. You will not facilitate or encourage. We need, you make. You will not provide. You will not create. We disable, you will not create. You will not use. You will not use. You will not use. You will keep. You will not share. You will not transfer. You select, we reserve, we believe. We respect. You will not post. You post. We provide, you protect. We remove, you believe, we will provide. You repeatedly infringe, we will disable. You will not use. You collect, you will obtain, you collect, you will use. You will not post. You will not tag. We currently provide. You change, you will update. You provide. You make a payment, you agree. You use, you must comply. You agree. You give us permission, you like, you permit, we will respect, we use, you represent. We do not give. You understand. You use, you agree. You create or administer, you agree. You download or use, you agree. We give, you express. We make changes, we make changes. You violate, we will notify. You will resolve, you agree. You will indemnify and hold, we provide. We do not control or direct, we are not responsible, we are not responsible. We try to keep, you use, we are providing, we do not guarantee, you release, you waive, we will not be. We strive to create, we also strive to respect. You consent. You will not engage, you will not use. We mean, we make. We mean. We mean. We mean. We mean. We mean. We mean. We mean, you delete. We mean. We fail. You will not transfer. We reserve. You will comply. You agree. You add. You use. You offer. You post. We will default.
So that's the text of that poem that I had. I brought it into a computer. Just the regular old Apple voice that was there. I chose the Allison voice, not because it was called Allison like me, but because it was the one that sounded at the time when I made the piece in 2018. The voices weren't as, they were still a little bit robotic, and I liked that. But I wanted the voice to be something that had a sense of authority, but also was warm. And I felt like that particular voice had authority, and it had a bit of warmth to it with the kind of a robot sound that went with it. And just to show you what the text of that particular piece looks like, when you put, what I did was I went through the Facebook end user license agreement and pulled out all the we do, you do clauses, just to kind of see what within that end user license agreement, how that terminology that's creating that contract between Facebook and Facebook users, like how that worked. So this is, and I kept the paragraphs. So when I talk about the aesthetics of a document, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the terminology that shapes my art practice in a minute. And aesthetics is one. The aesthetics of the document, I didn't want to interrupt kind of the flow of the language. I wanted to see when you kept the paragraphs, when you kept the different breaks, which clauses were collected together, what was important, and I kept the capitalization. So the text is just extracted from the from those documents itself. And I feel like the character, like I did one for Twitter, I did one for iOS, and the personality of the different phrases that I pulled from the different end user license agreements was really telling. the Twitter language is very pleasant and community oriented. I found this Facebook language to be really, really strict. And I thought that that was interesting to talk about with people who agree to the end user license agreements. We never read it. So what we did when we had that first EULA League meeting, we did a read around of it and highlighted different things. Like I, did the assignment. This is your section, and this is your section, and this is your section. And, we went through and we looked at it. And I think one of the participants of the program says, I always read my end user license agreement now. And that's kind of the activist portion of the project. So let's take a look at some of the terms that I use to shape the practice. And terminology is hugely important to me. I'm an English teacher. So some of the language I use is space and place. And this is directly from my experience at MCAD. I really had to think about the difference between the two, where space is something that is, has parameters. You can locate it on a map, or place has parameters, and space is expansive. It can contract and it can expand. For me, place is denotative, where space is connotative. So you can think about the actual location on the map of Toronto, and you can think about the experience of that city. Community has a very specific meaning in my work as well. And it's something that a little later on, I'll talk about how I'm kind of troubled by the use of the word community, but communities share physical places and spaces. So we share identities. We also share our cities, and we have to negotiate our relationships with one another in that, and the process of that negotiation is politics. So I'm reclaiming the word politics from like Ron DeSantis and Matt Gaetz here in Florida. I don't know if they're doing that. I don't know that they're negotiating our community relationships so much as imposing particular community relationships on. But to politic is to say, okay, well, this group wants this, my group wants this, let's negotiate that together. And you can negotiate something like identity. You can negotiate spaces and places, how we do things together. And then the most important thing, I think, guiding the process of EULA League, making it an artistic practice, not just, a reading group. And not to say that there's anything wrong. I don't mean to, speak about reading groups. It's not that it's an either or. It is focused on the ideal formal practice around how we engage with one another. So, depth of field in photography is a part of the aesthetics of a photograph. Tonal values, shading, when we think about two-dimensional work, that becomes important. Scale and mass, and those things are important when we talk about three-dimensional work. But when we think of the aesthetics of a relationship, how should people greet each other? What should be done before we begin a negotiation? What are the patterns that you follow in your community relationships? And when you pull out the language from the Facebook end user license agreement, what are they indemnifying themselves against? And what are you, the user, being held responsible for? But because they're defining the terms of use and you're not able to negotiate that with them, what do they end up having that you, the end user, might lose or have to give up in order to use this thing? So when I think about aesthetics, I'm thinking about formal practices, and a legal document is a formal thing. And so are the informal ideas that shape our behavior with one another, because even though they're not written down, when they're used consistently, they are formal in a sort of an abstract conceptual way. And as I said, I am having some issues with the notion of community. And this is a new development for me. So I'm going to share another piece. There's no audio, so if you're like, I can't hear anything, that's because you're not meant to hear anything. There's nothing to hear. So let's take a look at this. So I'm going to talk over it because I think you get the idea. This is a piece that I made to share with my neighbors. I live in a predominantly white neighborhood, and when I first moved here, my family was all still in Canada, and I felt very visible. It wasn't very comfortable at all. It was the exact opposite of comfortable. And I needed a way to communicate to my neighbors my discomfort. And, you know, I projected this clip. I'll show you some of the images that shape the space where the work was installed. You know, when I say I felt very visible, I felt looked at. I didn't just, I felt surveyed. And the image that you're looking at right now is like, if you walk past where I used to live, you could see over the fence, like into the backyard. And if you've ever lived in the suburbs, you know that your neighbors are constantly thinking about your yard. Have you trimmed your trees? Have you mowed your lawn? You know, that kind of upkeep. And if you're Black, or me, because I'm Black, I felt like those things came to bear on my relationship with my neighbors more than they would otherwise. So in the evenings, when my neighbors would walk their dogs, I decided for a month, I think it was a month initially, I had, you know, blinds, and I could project using my little artist materials. I could project this friendly, idyllic Black family waving at them to kind of give them something to look at. And to give them the thing that I imagine my white neighbors wanted in order to feel comfortable with me living next door to them. So that's where this piece, There Goes the Neighborhood, in parentheses, comes from. In my art practice, I use words like, well, when I was building the foundation for my practice while I was at MCAD, I thought of myself as using community-sourced narratives. So the title of this piece is a community-sourced narrative, right? There goes the neighborhood. We all know what it means when you hear it. The piece is sampled. I took this as a sample from a movie that was actually filmed in Florida. So this is the Florida in the filmic mind, in the larger, you know, discussion about what Florida is and what Florida can represent when it's its most polished, alligator-free version of itself. So I sampled this clip, and then there's that looping, and anybody who listens to music knows that that's the language of music that has come out of the Black community, right? Sampling, looping, all of that, the community source narrative. And those are things that I think they go to my understanding of how an artist should position herself using Toni Morrison's kind of her claims about what an artist is. So for Toni Morrison, the artist is the best art that comes from the community is unquestionably political and irrevocably beautiful at the same time. So I thought the piece looked great, you know, with the blinds that kind of move a little bit, and you know, it had that haze. It wasn't as crisp as when you go to the movies. It was kind of a strange installation. An artist can have a tribal or racial sensibility and an individual expression of it. And I do feel that. I think that's a very important part of my art practice is, you know, I am a member of a Black diaspora, but I am also an individual. And so the things that I do as an artist have to be reflective of that. And it is the affective and participatory relationship between the artist and the audience that is of primary importance. So I took the space to communicate that to my neighbors. Did any of them ever ask me about it? No. And that's why I want to kind of trouble the idea of the term neighbor. Let me go back. I'm not ready for that yet. So I feel like when we, or not neighbor, the term community. I have a problem with the word community lately because I feel like a lot of us are using it. A lot of us artists are using it to cloak or to cover for something. Communities are engaged with one another. And I sense that a lot of us artists who say that we're working in communities are interlopers. We kind of pop in and pop out. And that became clear to me when I tried to get EULA League in institutions and places, but I wanted to have a more diverse audience than the people who typically go to museums. I mean, that's still a problem, you know, since when I graduated from MCAD, that was an issue, and it remains a problem, getting more diverse people, more diverse communities to engage in these institutional spaces. And then there's the language around my work as well that I think can be a little bit academic. So I was like, am I really a community member? I definitely think that there's a neighbor relationship going on. So your neighbor, you might wave hi to them and get their key and, you know, check their mail when they're out of town. But if you're the Black neighbor, you understand that that comes with a particular guardedness, if not on your neighbor's part, because I don't really know what my neighbors are thinking, but on my part, there's a level of guardedness. I understand the police in the United States to work for white communities. They do not work for me. They will work for me if I'm living in a white neighborhood, right? Only because this is a nice neighborhood, right? I don't understand, and I have to keep that awareness. So maybe there's me acting as a neighborly, maybe my art practice is more a neighborly art practice. This is, like I said, this is brand new language. But if you think of Black communities as neighbors with the majority white community of the United States, I think that works a little bit better. Okay, so this is really bizarre because I can't see anybody's faces. I don't know what people are thinking. I'm just talking into the screen now. So that's odd, especially talking about something as personal to me as this is. That shift in term is actually really troubling for my art practice because I don't know. I feel I long for community ties. There are communities I identify with. The more I probe my relationship with the communities that I identify with, the more uncertain I am that I am actually a community member. I am certain that I am a neighbor because there is an adjacency that exists. As a teacher in a Title I school in a community that's very different to where I live, but I've been there for a long time, I still question whether I'm a community member or, you know, and that's a horrible thing to say, an ally of my students, because my students are Black like me. There are a lot of things that we share, but there are a lot of things that we don't share. And my awareness of that is what makes me challenge and trouble that term community in my art practice. So I for the EULA League that I did with the Fort Lauderdale Library, they wanted it to coincide with the election. And I was able to pull a series of documents. I thought that if somebody wanted to think about the way actual politics are having an impact on our lives, and then do something, because Lord knows from like September to November, there was a sense that we have to participate because the direction that this is going in is, oh my gosh, is it really going in that direction? And I wanted EULA League to be a place where people could start pulling together ideas for their own engagement. Beyond conceptualizing their social contracts, I wanted people to have a space where they could start thinking about, well, how do I build an engagement? So I started with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that the UN put out. And I pulled it into the software that we were using to teach online. And there's a translation function on it because our school is a diverse school. We have students who speak Haitian Creole. We have students who speak French. We have students who speak Spanish. We have Brazilian Portuguese speakers, and of course our English speakers. So I wanted to think about what that Declaration of Human Rights would mean for North America in particular, because that's where we are, and how the aesthetics of that changes from language to language. What does it sound like when different language from that is pulled, similar to the We You piece? So get ready, because it's a cacophony of voices that you're about to encounter. It can be a little jarring if you're not ready for it. So let's go. And it's visual as well. Okay, here we go.
Derechos iguales e inalienables con derecho a todos los derechos.
Right to life.
Derecho a la vida.
Right to recognition.
Derecho al reconocimiento.
Right to effective remedy.
Derecho a un remedio efectivo.
Right to be.
Derecho a la protección. Derecho a la protección.
Freedom.
Derecho a la
Right to
libertad.
leave. Right
Derecho
to
a
seek
salir
and enjoy.
Derecho a buscar
nationality. Right to
Derecho a
change.
nacionalidad.
Right to marry.
Derecho a cambiar.
Right to own.
Derecho a casarse.
Right to freedom. Right to freedom.
Derecho a poseer.
Right to freedom. Right to freedom.
Derecho a la
Right to
libertad.
freedom. Right to freedom.
Derecho a la libertad.
Right to take part.
Derecho a la libertad.
Right of equal access.
Derecho a
social
participar.
security. Right to social security.
Derecho de igualdad de acceso.
Right to work. Right to equal pay.
Derecho a la seguridad social.
Right to just and favorable.
Derecho a
Right to just
trabajar.
and favorable. Right to form and
Derecho a la
join. Right to
igualdad
form and
salarial.
to join. Right to rest and leisure.
Derecho a ser
Right to rest
justo y
and leisure
favorable.
with standard.
Derecho a formarse y
security.
unirse.
Right to
Derecho
security.
al descanso y al ocio.
Right to education.
Derecho a una norma.
Right to choose.
Derecho a la seguridad.
Right freely to participate.
Derecho a la educación.
Right to the
Derecho
protection.
a elegir.
Right to engage.
Derecho a participar libremente. Derecho a la protección. Derecho a participar.
So I think that the way I organized this was, as I said, I took that text. I took it into the translation software, and it's a reading software that is a part of Canvas that we use to do our online instruction. And I'm just as I was with WeU, interested in what the computerized ideal voice was, back in 2018 when I made that piece. I was really interested in what voices our students hear when the text is translated and read to them in school. And so for Canada, because I did it in geographic, like Canada, and then the United States, and then Mexico at the bottom. So I did it in terms of, it's not in alphabetical order, it's not in population order, it's not in landmass. Actually, it is in landmass order. But I did it where, and I used the official languages of the 3 countries. So Canada has 2. So we have a Canadian and then Canadienne because she's a woman. So I used not the male version of Canadian in French, but the female. And the same with, and everybody starts at the same point. And, it was interesting comparing the American English voice and the Canadian English voice. The pacing is a little different. The pitch is a little different. All these subtle things that shape the character, the idealized character of all these places. And, if this is NAFTA, I remember when I was a kid in Canada and they're trying to pass NAFTA, there was that community language. But I think we are more in a neighbor situation than we are in a North American continental, situation. And Caribbeans, which my family is Caribbean, will tell you that the Caribbean is also a part of North America, but we're going to forget that for today. So that's all the rights we have. When we do the EULA League, we invite experts to come. So I had, the same time we did the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, we had the United States Bill of Rights, and I called a constitutional law professor to come in and talk to us about the difference between the UN Declaration of Human Rights versus the Bill of Rights. And it was really illuminating. The Declaration of Human Rights is aspirational, right? And it grants rights, but there is no legal mechanism to ensure that the rights that are listed, and let me share the text of this. This is what it looks like in text, because there's a text version for all of these things. So when he was talking to us, Dr. Zeldin was talking to us, he was like, the Bill of Rights it only shapes what the government can do to you. It's limiting on the government. It's not making any declaration at all about the rights of citizens themselves, but it's saying what the government can't do to you with respect to freedom of speech, what it can't do to you with respect to search and seizure. And then the Declaration of Human Rights, which is very expansive, and it lists the rights that you have. And you can see that I use that kind of same, just pulling out the phrase where there's an action, not the full descriptor that's there. You have all of these things, but there's no official mechanism to guarantee that you have access to these things. And that was illuminating. Very, very illuminating, just for me as a person in the world. The next piece that I did, and I worked with a city council member. He came and talked about the process of working with your community. The next piece was condition report, which I don't have it here. Why don't I have it here? Condition report is another piece for EULA League that I made, but the language that I used to name it came from Glenn Ligon. So I'm going to share, this is what condition report looks like on its own. Okay, great. And then this is the Glenn Ligon piece that it's named after, which I think is, after a week like we've had in this country, it's really, it's kind of a difficult thing to look at. Can you see that? No, it didn't work. Your screen sharing is paused. No, I don't want to do that. There, share that. Is it sharing? Resume, share. Okay, great. So there it is. So Glenn Ligon commissioned this piece. He had made these prints based on the I am a man signs that were used by protesters in the 1960s. And he asked a museum, you know, when work is about to move from one location to the next, or is going to be put on display, or is going to be loaned, they do a condition report on it. So they scan the piece and then they kind of look at the state of, you know, what's happening to it. And the Declaration of Human Rights, Universal Human Rights, versus the Declaration, I am a man. And then to look at what the state of that is. When I did EULA League in the fall, it wasn't as heavy as it is today to talk about this. You know, one of the things we watched, I couldn't watch it all. I saw some of it. But in my family, people watched the entirety of the trial. And the thing that frustrates me is the lengths to which we still have to go to convince our neighbors that we are people, that we are human. It's really frustrating. And then in Florida, we have a governor who is literally going to make us fight for every single right in the Bill of Rights. Oh my gosh, that guy. So there's a software called Hypothesis that allows you to do annotations on text. And anybody who knows my art practice from back in the day knows that annotations are a really big part of my practice. And this allowed me to do what Glenn Ligon does in that piece. This is the budget from Governor Ron DeSantis. And when you read it, when you look at the surface of it, it seems fine. And the first few times that I read it, I was like, I didn't realize that the budget for an entire state could be 21 pages long. Wow, that's not as long as I thought it would be. And this is one of the civic actions that I want EULA League to be able to do moving forward, is to give people exposure to these things that really do shape our lives and take out the sort of, you know, one of the ways the aesthetics of these things works on us is the text for an end user license agreement is just so long and the legalese is just impenetrable. To find the budget for the state of Florida, you have to dig around on the state website to find it. It's not readily accessible. So by making a space, whether in an institution or in a dining hall in a grocery store, for making us like picking a place and making space to say, today we're going to be looking at this thing that otherwise is just overwhelming. I think that's one of the most important parts. So I spent a lot of time with this document. And what I decided to do was look at what the community in the form of newspapers, in the form of the press, had to say. So if you click any of the highlights on it, and the link is right there on the website, you'll see all the annotations that I made and links to where I found the information that is giving you more information about what's happening with these numbers that seem, wow, like Florida's really financially in a great state. Well, what was cut? Where was it cut? That water thing that was on the verge of breaking, water was cut in the budget in 2020. And Oh my gosh. You should just take some time to go through some of these things. So this is my idea of condition report. This is what you're presented. This is what you see, a clean declaration of a bolder, brighter future. And then the press, which is so essential to the citizenry being informed. And I use the word citizen not to mean people who have legal status, but people who are here who participate in the life of a nation, right? The citizenry has to kind of look at this document, and the press is doing the job of giving people the information that they need in order to make decisions about who gets to decide what our budget is in 2022. I think, like, I wish there was more faces and feedback, but that's it. I would like to talk. I have one more thing I want to show you, but I don't need to show you right now. Let's talk.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Allison. We are now opening up the Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can drop them into the Q&A. And then open up the chat too, because I know sometimes people get confused between the two.
Oh, there is a Q&A. There it is. No questions.
I think I have a question if you don't
Sure.
mind.
Yep.
I was wondering if you can speak a little bit, it's not, I guess, a request more than a question, but if you can speak a little bit more about sort of the other people involved in this sort of like collaborative effort and how.
Sure. So literally, I worked with, so when I originally said that I worked with NSU Museum of Art, that's because when you find somebody who's a champion of your work, you know, stay loyal. So Sebastian Perez was the coordinator for education at Nova Southeastern Museum of Art. And he, wherever he was, whatever he was doing, he was like, you know, Allison really does try to engage the patrons of the museum when she does a project. What are you thinking about this? What are you thinking about that? So he always gave me opportunities to make something, do something, to, and was very supportive of the conceptual nature of the work that I do. So when he moved to the Fort Lauderdale Museum of Art, or Fort Lauderdale Library, see, I did it again, Fort Lauderdale Library, he says, hey, the library really wants to do something around civic engagement. And I know that you're constantly thinking about this. You have your project, EULA League, you know, do you want to bring it here? And that's how I got to do EULA League at the library. And then I searched, I looked at local universities. I emailed a bunch of professors for constitutional law. I reached out to different members of City Hall. Because the library is located in Fort Lauderdale, but I don't live there, I wanted to make sure that everybody that I brought in as an expert for EULA League was somebody who was based in Broward County. And in Florida, in South Florida in particular, we think of ourselves, yeah, in terms of our towns, but really more in terms of the county at large. So I, you know, didn't just stay in Fort Lauderdale. I was really comfortable working with people from different municipalities around the county. But that's how I bring in the experts, is I just look for them. And it gives me an opportunity to do something that otherwise I wouldn't do, right? For me, the art practice is a way to engage with these civic processes. You know, I can put on my little artist hat and say, I'm an artist who does this X, Y, and Z project. Whereas Allison, the citizen, you know, it's funny because being an artist more so than my work as a teacher has given me an identity that allows me to push into places that I wouldn't otherwise push into. So that's been pretty interesting.
There's two other questions that are kind of related to both, and then I might have another one related to one of them. But Ellen is asking, can you talk about what people's reactions have been to the education on budgets?
Wow. So strange things are afoot in the state of Florida. We got a raise last year, and we thought that because of the pandemic, they would not give us a raise. And we got that. And then, so we haven't had a lot of pushback on, because since DeSantis has been in office, teachers have been funded. The way that that money, it is an Amos Paul Kennedy print. The way that that money has trickled down has been strange. So it goes into teachers' hands, but then this week they signed a bill that said that families making up to $100,000 a year can use a voucher to get their kids into charter schools. And it seems like that money is now shifting through that type of legislative strategy away from public schools into the hands of private schools. We were forced, because they didn't cut our budget, to go back into the classroom. And I've been teaching in the classroom since October 31st. And I've had 7 students across 4 classes of 30 students each today, because the students' families are not required to be there. So that, yeah, that's, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think people are a little uninformed about it. And I don't know what I can, well, that's not true. I do know what. I became a zone captain for my precinct, my voting precinct. So I have like newsletters and stuff that I send out to make sure that people are informed about things. Okay, can you talk a little bit more how it started as an artist playing a role in making? Okay, so this is a multi-part question, Jen, and I will happily answer it. I felt like the people in my family didn't have a relationship with art. And the art that I made, beginning with my work as a grad student, kind of beckoned people to come in and participate. And I liked that. I liked that there was a piece that I did that was about reflection, and then people would gravitate toward it, and you could see them kind of trying to figure it out and read it and understand it and then drift away from it. I made a lot of artist books, and I enjoyed that people would pick them up and read them, and I could play with the text that people could think. But the topics that kept coming up in my work were topics around identity and topics around, well, what's the real story of this place that we're in? And it, dealing with my students and watching them kind of go out in the world and not have the type of information that I wish I could provide for them, is one of the things that kind of started me thinking about, where do people get the chance to think about how we interact as communities and really make a plan for how, as individuals, we act. Position that allows you to connect with different universities. Yes, so the degrees validate me. Like if I say, I'm Allison Bolah, and here's my resume, and here's my artist statement, and here's my teacher statement, and I send those things out, and this is a project statement, I always get a response, even if it's somebody saying no. There's a legitimacy to that title, artist, with the MFA behind it, that works in my favor when I try to communicate with people. What's nice is to also have, information to kind of support that. We've been talking about city artists who embed in civic processes. Yes. And I kind of think that the work that I'm doing as a precinct captain, like I said, my process as an artist informs my work as a precinct captain, my work as a teacher, because it is so grounded in what Toni Morrison said the artist should be, an individual expression of the community aesthetics. And if the community aesthetics that are under discussion are the way we engage with each other, so I understand from my family and from the Deerfield Beach High School community, that each individual is expected to bring their heartfelt best to the community. Intentions matter, but then consistency and effort and presence matter as well. And the community's job is to facilitate that engagement. That's how I position myself as an artist, and it has really influenced the way that I work when I'm working as a precinct captain, as a teacher.
Very cool. There's a question from Felipe Fernandez that says that you're a conceptual artist, but I know your practice began with photography. How do you think about photography in relationship to your practice? And I think that's a good question, because some of the things I noticed in your talk, like the use of the Declaration of Human Rights, brought me back to an Ariella Zule essay on that essay. But I'm really curious how you.
So I started in photography by being a fan of fashion magazines, and I tried to recreate what I saw in those magazines, but like in my life. And I don't know where the impulse to make sure that I included myself in my spaces in my photographs came from, but from the very beginning, it was like, well, I love these photographs. I'm going to try and recreate them from the material that I have. And that's an impulse that has remained, right? So I never had access to lighting, but I was able to recreate some of the lighting that I saw in those fashion magazines. And I guess that ethos of, well, you can figure it out has stayed. The problem that arose for me as a photographer was I only worked within my life. I only worked with one camera, one lens. It was always black and white. The photographs were always the same size. They couldn't be staged. Those were kind of the rules that I made. But I found that I was just kind of pulling things from my life without actually being in my life. But I always also thought of photographs as kind of reflections. Like you take this photograph and then you look at it the way that you look at yourself in the mirror, and you kind of think about what that composition is. And that is still the way I think of myself as working. What was interesting was that at MCAD, everything that I did had a photographic process involved in it. That's not necessarily the case anymore, but the type of thinking that the strict parameters, well, let me use the software that we're using for translation at high school to come up with these voices, right? Let me use these tools that are available to me here. That's kind of the same way of thinking about it. So if a photograph is what's required for a piece, I will totally make it. But now I use whatever the idea requires is what I use now. And there was that transition from strict photography to photographic processes to not necessarily photographic work to now whatever the work requires. MCAD was like right at the hinge of that.
Ellen says that she sees a Amos Paul Kennedy print in the background and is wondering which artist you're inspired by, because you mentioned a couple during the talk, but I'm curious.
Yes. Okay. So Amos Paul Kennedy, I have done some workshops with him, and I think he and I share an ethos, if not our love of overalls. I love Glenn Ligon. Sophie Kahl, so important to me. The number of times I say, take care of yourself, and think about that work a day, not even a week, but a day, that is, it just resonates with me. I have a piece called Left Black that there's a flip book at MCAD in the artist book, and there's the word black, and it shifts from black to white by the end of the book. And I cannot for the life of me remember who did it. Dang, I wish I could. But there's just kind of anybody who plays with language is work that I'm attracted to. Helmut Newton is one of my favorite photographers ever, but don't tell anybody I said that. I don't know if he's, I don't know where his reputation is these days, but I loved the way that women looked in his photographs. Let's see, what else? Who else? I could just turn my head and look at the things. Lorna Simpson. One of Lorna Simpson's pieces that she did an installation in a house was really important to me back when I was in MCAD, and it's still important to me now, because when art critics wrote about that piece, if they were not members of or didn't come out of a Black community tradition, they totally, to me, misread the piece. I was like, how can you not see what the doubling that's taking place in this work? Let me see, who else inspires me? All kinds of people.
It's really an endless list when you ask an artist that, especially.
Yeah, and then your mind goes blank and you're like, oh, I don't know.
You're looking at everything all over.
Yeah, I'm trying to see. I'm like, I can't remember. And you know what? I usually keep like a list of top 5 things handy, and I don't have it handy now.
Well, we're 2 minutes over our time, so if there's no other questions, which I mean, if we can stick around longer if you don't mind, but
yeah, I can stay if people want to talk.
But we are at the end of the program as well. And I don't think we have more. Maybe time to end, but I'm looking at Tom thanking you. Yes, so Allison, thank you so much for joining us and telling us about EULA League and your work. This is definitely one of my favorite ProPac talks we've had this semester.
Thank you. I wish we could hear each other, like the audience and people, but the Zoom world.
Zoom webinar world. But I will definitely be following up with an email for you tomorrow, a long one. So.
Oh, excellent! Thank you. And it's so good to see all my friends, Tom and Rebecca and James and Jen and oh my gosh, and Jackie and everybody's here. So cool. Very cool.
Well, thank you so much, Allison. And then everyone else, thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next Thursday for Creatives in Texas with Caitlin Warner.
Thank you.
Everyone.